The year was 1873, and the sky over Deadwood Junction was the color of old tin, dull, battered, and cold as sin. Smoke from the locomotive still hung in the air like a ghost that didn't know it was dead, and the iron horse huffed as if exhausted from dragging all those souls out west. Eleanor Briggs stood alone on the platform, her gloved hands clutched tightly around a worn satchel and a crumpled letter that smelled faintly of rose water and desperation. The letter had once brought hope. She'd read it 100 times on the train, lips moving silently with the words, "I will take you as my wife, sight unseen, and offer you honest shelter and steady bread. My heart longs for a woman of grace and quiet spirit." It was signed Samuel Pike, General Goods proprietor. His penmanship had been confident, assured, but the man who stepped off the freight cart now was neither gracious nor hopeful. Samuel Pike had a chest like a keg, and the slick-back hair of a man used to saying no more than yes. His gaze slid over Eleanor with calculation, then settled into something colder than the wind crawling across the prairie. "You're Miss Briggs?" "Yes, sir." She mustered a small smile, pushing back her bonnet. "Eleanor, you ain't what I expected." His voice was loud, too loud. Others on the platform turned to look. I came from Charleston. I wrote you I can see that." He gestured to the letter in her hand like it was filth. "But I asked for a God-fearing woman with strength in her back and sweetness in her face. You look," his nose wrinkled, "worn, older than your years, hair like wire. You lied." Eleanor flushed deep beneath the collar of her travel-stained coat. Her fingers tightened on the satchel's leather handle until it creaked. "I sent you a truthful likeness. That tintype, it lied for you then. Or maybe time caught up. Either way," he raised his voice again, "I'll not be taking you, Miss Briggs. I got a business to run, not a charity." Someone snorted nearby. A pair of boys chuckled. A woman pretended not to stare as she adjusted her gloves. Eleanor stood perfectly still, like a deer that knows the next move means the end. "Please," she said softly, "I've come all this way. You'd best get back on that train. Or find a hotel, if you can afford one." He turned and walked off without another glance, calling out to a young clerk waiting by the wagon, "Ain't got time for foolishness." The sound of horses and wagon wheels swallowed his final word. The conductor gave her a pitying glance as he passed. "Next train east is Thursday. Might be a while." Eleanor did not move. The platform emptied slowly. Children tugged at mothers' skirts. Laborers lit up cigarettes and spat on the planks. The wind picked up again, curling around her like it meant to carry her bones away. Minutes or hours passed. Time had no meaning anymore. Eventually, she drifted down the steps and wandered through Deadwood like a ghost. The town was meaner than she'd expected. Smaller, too. Rough buildings huddled together as if afraid of the wind. Signs swung on crooked nails. The saloon's piano banged out something ragged, and a drunk stumbled down the alley behind it with a bottle cradled like a child. Every window she passed showed faces she didn't know and didn't trust. No one offered help. No one looked her in the eye. She made it to the edge of town as the sun began its slow drop behind the hills. Trees leaned toward the river, their limbs bare and black. Eleanor followed the path without knowing why, her boots crunching over frostbitten weeds and frozen earth. A raven cawed overhead. The river glimmered ahead, deep, gray, and fast. She stepped closer, the air turning colder with each breath. There was no place to sleep, no home to go back to. She'd sold her last brooch to pay for the journey. The coat she wore had belonged to her mother, too thin for Dakota Territory and too full of memories. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small pouch. Inside, 2 river stones. Heavy, solid. She thought of Charleston, of her dying mother's hands gripping hers. "Go west, Ellie," her mother had said, voice cracked with fever. "Start fresh. Find something good." She thought of her father's face, already gone by then, and the way the neighbors whispered about her being left behind. They called her plain, said she was already a spinster at 28. Her only dowry had been words, letters written with trembling hope and soft honesty. But even hope had betrayed her now. Eleanor stepped onto the riverbank. Wind tore at her skirts, snapping them like sails. Her boots sank into the mud. She closed her eyes. It would be cold, sharp, quick. The stones would help. And then nothing. No more hungry nights. No more rejection. No more letters returned unopened. "Forgive me," she whispered. Then came the sound of hooves. She opened her eyes. A horse stood on the path behind her, steam rising from its nostrils in puffs. The man astride it wore a dark coat and hat pulled low over his brow, a rifle slung across his back. The beast shifted, hooves pawing the earth, as if sensing the tension in the air. The rider dismounted with slow, deliberate movements. He said nothing. Eleanor turned toward him, startled and angry all at once. "Go away," she snapped. Her voice trembled. "Just go." The man didn't move. He took a step forward, gloved hands loose at his sides. Close enough now that she could see his face, weathered, tan, silent. He was older than her, perhaps mid-30s. Maybe more. A thick scar ran from his temple down to his jaw like a lightning bolt had tried to carve its way out. She took another step toward the water. He still didn't speak. "Are you deaf?" she cried, tears hot against her chilled cheeks. "I said go." Finally, his voice came, low and rough, like gravel beneath wagon wheels. "You don't belong in there." She froze. Those 5 words cut through the fog of despair like a blade. Her breath caught. The stones slipped from her hand and fell to the ground with a soft thud. "What? You don't belong in there." He took another step forward. "Come with me instead." She stared at him. "Why?" He didn't answer. The wind howled between them. Eleanor looked down at the water again, churning, dark, endless. Then back to the stranger. Her knees gave way. He caught her before she hit the ground. His arms were strong, steady. He smelled of pine and horses and smoke. She sobbed against his chest, not even knowing his name, not caring. He didn't speak again. He lifted her gently, like a wounded thing, and carried her to the horse. She didn't resist as he settled her into the saddle before climbing up behind her. His arm wrapped around her waist, not possessive, not bold, protective. They rode into the dusk without a single word more. Behind them, the river kept rushing on. The stones lay forgotten in the mud. And somewhere in the vast wilderness ahead, the first threads of something unknown, fragile, terrifying, and real, began to form. The trail wound north through a grove of bare cottonwoods, their skeletal branches clawing at the last vestiges of dusk. The man hadn't said a word since lifting Eleanor into the saddle, and she, shivering against the deep cold, hadn't dared break the silence. His arm around her waist was a steady line of warmth, yet it didn't speak of ownership, only protection. Distance and closeness braided together in one strange, silent man. She tried to peer at him from the corner of her eye. His face was stoic, set like stone carved by years of wind and hardship. That scar, a jagged line down his right cheek, looked even more fearsome in the failing light. But it was the eyes that caught her. Quiet, yes, but not cold. There was something in them, a watchfulness, maybe even a sorrow deeper than her own. The horse picked its way over frozen roots and patches of old snow. Somewhere an owl hooted once, then went quiet again. The world had the hush of winter's breath. After nearly an hour, the trail broke into a clearing. Before them stood a small cabin nestled against the base of a rocky bluff. Smoke drifted from the chimney in slow curls. The roof sagged slightly under the weight of early frost, but the windows glowed golden with lamplight. He dismounted without a word and reached for her. Eleanor hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, but not rough. When her boots touched the ground, her knees buckled from the ride and cold. He caught her again. "This way," he murmured. She followed him toward the door, boots crunching softly on frostbitten grass. He opened it with a quiet push and stepped aside for her to enter first. Warmth hit her like a wave. The cabin was plain but tidy. One room with a stone hearth, a heavy wooden table, and a bed in the far corner. A cook stove hissed softly, and the scent of venison stew clung to the air like an embrace. "You hungry?" His voice was hoarse. She nodded before remembering her manners. "Yes, sir. Thank you." He motioned toward a chair and disappeared briefly into a side pantry. She sat, unsure where to put her hands. Her satchel still hung from her shoulder, damp from the riverbank. She sat down gently. He returned with a bowl of stew and a thick slice of cornbread. Eleanor's stomach growled at the sight of it, but she paused. "I never got your name." He sat across from her and stirred the coals with an iron poker. "Boone, Boone," she tried it on her tongue. "That's your first or last?" He didn't look up. "Only name I got left." The silence returned, stretching long between them. She picked at the cornbread, trying not to eat too fast, but her hunger betrayed her. She devoured the stew in a few greedy bites, ashamed of her own need. Boone stood and moved to the shelf, pulling down a blanket. He handed it to her without a word and went to the fire, where he sat cross-legged like a man used to watching flames instead of people. "Thank you," she said softly, clutching the wool close. He nodded, eyes never leaving the fire. "You got folks?" She shook her head. "No, sir. Back east. All gone. Mother passed last spring. Father long before that." He didn't say sorry, didn't offer platitudes, just grunted softly and fed another log to the fire. "I had a letter. A man in Deadwood said he'd marry me. Sight unseen. I arrived today." Her throat tightened. "He said I was too old, too plain." Boone's eyes flicked toward her, then back to the fire. "I wasn't always plain." She gave a sad laugh. "Though I suppose I've always been unwanted." His jaw shifted slightly, as if biting back words. But again he said nothing. She leaned forward, voice shaking. "Why'd you stop me?" "At the river." This time, he looked at her fully. His eyes were a storm held in check. "'Cause I know that look," he said. "Ain't just sorrow. It's the end of hope. I seen it in my ma's eyes the night my pa didn't come back from war. Seen it in my brother's, too, just before he swallowed a bullet." She sat frozen. Boone leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Don't mean you oughta, and just 'cause one man couldn't see what you're worth. You wanted a husband. That what you still want?" She blinked. I don't know. I just wanted to be safe. To be chosen." Boone nodded once, slowly. "Then stay here. Few nights. Till you figure what comes next." She studied him. "And what do you want in return?" Boone's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Nothing I gotta take. I ain't like the men in town. I don't drink, don't whore, and I don't hurt women. But you live alone. Easier that way." Eleanor held his gaze. "You speak little, but you listen good. Been my way a long time." She wrapped the blanket tighter. "May I ask what happened to your face?" Boone hesitated. "Gunfight. Wasn't mine. Try to break it up. Got marked for my trouble." She thought about that. "So, you're the sort who steps into a storm to pull someone else out?" "Sometimes." He shifted, clearly uncomfortable with her questions. She smiled faintly, the first honest one in days. "Thank you, Boone." He stood. "You take the bed. I'll stay near the fire. But no arguments. I won't have you freeze after dragging you from that river's edge." She lay down without protest. The bed smelled of pine and worn cotton. The mattress was rough, stuffed with straw, but after so many sleepless nights on the train, it felt like heaven. She watched Boone settle by the hearth, wrapping himself in a second blanket. His profile was sharp against the glow, shoulders broad, posture unbending. "Boone, why don't you speak much?" He considered. "Most words are wasted, and the ones that aren't." He turned his head slightly toward her. "Those matter more." She closed her eyes, listening to the fire crackle and the wind whisper against the cabin walls. In that moment, wrapped in the warmth of his quiet company, Eleanor felt something stir, a seed of safety, a possibility. She dreamed that night, not of rivers or rejection, but of walking beside a man in silence, their footsteps in rhythm. No words, no promises, just presence. Morning came with gray skies and the hiss of sleet against the roof. Eleanor awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Boone was already dressed, stoking the fire and setting tin plates on the table. "You sleep?" "Yes," she said, brushing a curl from her cheek. "Better than I have in years." He poured her coffee and handed her a plate. "Storm's coming. Best you stay in today." She nodded and sipped. The warmth spread down her throat, pushing back the chill that had settled in her bones for weeks. After breakfast, Boone stepped outside to chop wood and Eleanor busied herself with cleaning. She folded blankets, swept ash, even tidied the shelf of dried herbs and bullets. She didn't ask permission. She needed purpose, even small ones. When Boone returned, covered in snow, he paused in the doorway. "You didn't have to do all that." "I wanted to," she said. "You gave me shelter. I can at least make it feel lived in." He glanced around the room, then gave a quiet nod. "Looks better." As the storm howled outside, they settled into a rhythm. Boone skinned a rabbit. Eleanor patched a worn shirt. Conversation was sparse, but not unfriendly. More like the quiet between heartbeats. That night, she found herself watching him over her stew. "Boone," she said, voice soft, "what happened to your brother?" Boone was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, he was tired. Too many battles. Too many ghosts. He met her eyes. "You carry that kind of tired, too." She looked down. "I'm trying to let go of it. That's something." When they turned in, he paused before lying down near the fire. "Eleanor." "Yes. You're not unwanted." She swallowed hard. "Thank you." The wind screamed through the trees outside, but inside the cabin, it was still. And in that stillness, something new took root. Not love, not yet, but the kind of quiet understanding that might one day grow into it. And far beyond the cabin walls, the town of Deadwood slept unaware that one rejected woman and one scarred man had crossed paths by fate and were no longer quite so alone. The wind came down from the mountains like a ghost with old scores to settle, rattling the cabin walls and screaming through the pines like some vengeful spirit. Boone stood on the porch with a rifle slung over one shoulder, watching the tree line, jaw clenched tight. Snow had stopped falling, but the cold had teeth and bit deep, nipping at the fingers and ears. He didn't shiver. Boone never did. He just listened, waited, and watched. Inside, Eleanor was at the stove, ladling beans and salt pork into tin bowls. She was steadier now, less brittle. The river that had nearly claimed her was fading into memory, but something else had taken its place. An ache that curled low in her gut when Boone stood too long in the cold, or when his eyes lingered on the mountains like they held memories too painful to voice. He came in with a gust of chill air and stomped the snow from his boots. "Riders." She froze. "How many?" "2. Maybe 3. Didn't come close, but they'll loop back." She swallowed hard. "Bandits." Could be bounty men. Could be ghosts." The wind howled again, like it heard its name spoken. Boone set the rifle by the door and peeled off his coat. "Eat. Then we talk." They ate in silence, spoons clinking against the bowls, fire popping low. Boone's eyes never stayed still, always shifting to the window, the door, the rifle. Eleanor watched him and felt a strange tightness in her chest. Not fear, exactly, but something close to it. Boone had saved her life. Twice. And yet there were corners of him she could not touch. Shadows even the fire wouldn't chase off. When the dishes were cleared and the fire bill high, Boone finally spoke. "Used to ride with a man named Burke. Long ago, before I came out here." Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "He ran a gang, train robbers, mostly. Quick hands, quicker lies. I wasn't one of them, not truly. I rode for protection, cause the ward left me with no home, no kin, and nothing but this scar and a bad reputation. Thought I could disappear with them, but I never did fit. What happened?" Boone's gaze dropped to the coals. "Burr killed a family outside Wichita. Said they saw too much. Shot the mother, slit the father's throat. Left a boy alive on accident. I walked away after that. Didn't look back." Eleanor's breath caught. "That boy, he testified. Men like Burke don't forget things like that. I reckon he's been sending eyes west for years. And you think those riders, they ain't looking to share stew by the fire, I'll say that much." She stood slowly. "Then we leave." Boone shook his head. "Not yet. Can't run blind into the hills. Snow's too thick. No cover." Eleanor crossed her arms. "Then what?" "We prepare." The next day passed in a blur of motion. Boone checked traps, chopped firewood, and repaired the front shutters. Eleanor packed a bag with dried meat, blankets, flint, and a small pistol Boone had handed her with quiet reluctance. "Don't aim unless you mean it," he'd said. "I won't," she replied. "But if I do, I'll mean it." That night, The wind calmed, but the air felt heavier somehow, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. They sat by the fire again, closer this time. Boone's hand brushed against hers when he passed the coffee, and neither of them pulled away. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if things had gone different?" she asked. "Different how? If Burke hadn't killed that family. If your brother hadn't. If your face hadn't gotten marked." Boone stared into the fire. "Maybe I'd own a ranch. Raise cattle. Hire farmhands. Never liked towns much. But I reckon I'd have a porch with a rocking chair and maybe a dog." She smiled softly. "And a wife." He looked at her, eyes unreadable. "Maybe." She didn't speak for a moment, heart thudding. Would she need to be young and beautiful? Boone shook his head slowly. She'd need to be strong, not afraid to speak her mind. Someone who's been through fire and come out forged instead of broken. Eleanor's cheeks flushed with heat that had nothing to do with the hearth. "That kind of woman's hard to find." "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not." They sat that way until the fire burned low, and Eleanor stood to take the bed. Boone rose too. "I'll stay by the door tonight," he said. "Riders will come at first light if they're coming." She hesitated. "Boone." He looked up. "Do you regret saving me?" His brow furrowed. "Why would I?" "Because I brought trouble to your doorstep." Boone stepped closer. "Trouble was coming either way. You just gave me something worth fighting for." Her breath caught in her throat, and in that moment, the space between them charged with something unspoken. Then he turned, slowly, and returned to his post by the door. Sleep came late. Dreams flickered behind Eleanor's eyelids. Horses in the snow, gunfire in the distance, Boone falling with blood on his chest. She jolted awake more than once, but each time the soft creak of Boone shifting near the door reassured her. He was still there, watching, guarding. At dawn, the sound came, a crunch of hooves on ice, slow and deliberate. Boone was already crouched by the window with his rifle. Eleanor dressed quickly and stepped behind him, pistol gripped tight in trembling fingers. 3 riders. Dark coats, dusted with frost. One wore a wide-brimmed hat with a red feather. Burke's man, no doubt. Boone's jaw tensed. They didn't dismount. The leader called out, voice sharp as a whip. "Boone Harrow, I know you're in there." Boone didn't reply. "You got a choice. Hand over the girl, or we burn this place down and shoot anything that moves." Eleanor stiffened. "They want me." "No," Boone said. "They want leverage." Outside, the man laughed. "Come on, Harrow. You owe us." Burke's been real patient, but patience don't last forever. Boone stepped forward and cracked the window, just wide enough to speak. "She ain't yours. Neither am I." "Then you're dead, friend." The first shot cracked the silence. Boone shoved Eleanor to the floor as bullets punched through the walls. He fired once, twice. One man screamed and fell from his horse. The next moments blurred. Smoke filled the room. Eleanor crawled to the rear, heart thundering. Boone moved like a ghost, ducking, reloading, firing again. Then came silence. She held her breath. Snow fell softly outside, untouched by the violence. Boone stood, bleeding from a graze along his arm. "They're gone. For now." She rushed to him. "Let me see that." "It's nothing," he said, wincing as she tied a strip of cloth around the wound. "You could have been killed." He met her eyes. "So could you. You should have let me go. If they want me." "I don't give a damn what they want," he growled. "You're here. You're mine to protect." Her hands trembled. "And if they come back with more?" "Then we keep moving. North, through the ridge trails. They won't follow through that mess." She looked up at him, tears blurring her vision. "Boone, I don't know if I can keep running." He reached for her hand and held it firm. "You ain't running. You're surviving. With me." The fire crackled again, but now it sounded like defiance. Outside, the wind had died completely, the world holding its breath for what came next. And in the stillness, Eleanor realized something deep in her bones. Boone Harrow wasn't just a stranger with a rifle. He was her second chance, her shelter in a world of storms. "Then I'll go," she whispered. "Wherever you lead me." Boone nodded once, solemn as a vow. "We ride tomorrow, but tonight we live." She helped him clean the blood and patch the walls as best they could. As night fell again, the fear remained, but it no longer ruled her. Boone had faced his ghosts to keep her safe. And in doing so, he taught her how to face her own. They lay down that night, not just as fugitives, but as something more, kindred spirits bound by battle and survival, their fates twisted together by fire and wind. And far off, beyond the edge of the forest, the ghosts howled once more. But this time, they were answered by the strength of two hearts refusing to be broken. The night had wrapped itself tight around the cabin, cold as a steel trap. Boone sat by the window, rifle resting in his lap, eyes scanning the dark shapes of the trees beyond. Eleanor was behind him, folding up blankets, the soft rustle of fabric almost louder than the silence that stretched between them. She could feel it, the pull of the unknown, the weight of what was coming. Boone hadn't said a word about it, but she knew. He could feel it too. The fire crackled low, the flames casting erratic shadows on the walls. Boone's face, always hard, was even more so tonight, a grim set to his jaw, his eyes shadowed with thoughts he didn't share. He hadn't spoken much since the riders had left, only giving her short commands and quiet instructions. She knew it wasn't just the bandits that worried him, though. It was the price on his head, the way Burke's men would come for him sooner or later. And that thought gnawed at her. How had it gotten this far? How had she gone from a woman about to end it all in the river to this? Stuck in the middle of the wilderness, tied to a man who had his own demons chasing him. Boone shifted, his boots scraping the floor as he stood and moved toward the door. He opened it just a crack, peering into the night. The wind was picking up again, the trees creaking as if protesting the storm that was still brewing in the distance. "They'll be back," he said, his voice low, rough as gravel. "I know," Eleanor whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant the bandits or the quiet terror that had lodged itself inside her chest. He turned to face her then, his eyes hard. "It's getting bad, Eleanor. We can't stay here. If they come back with more men, we'll be outnumbered." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had known it was coming, but hearing it spoken out loud made it real. Boone had always been the one with the plan, the one who took charge. But this time, even he didn't know how to stop what was coming. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stood there for a long moment, his fingers tightening around the rifle as if willing it to give him an answer. "We leave tonight," he said finally, his voice low and tight. "Head for the hills. The ridge trail's the best chance we've got. But we can't waste time." Eleanor nodded, her stomach twisting in knots. The idea of running, of leaving behind everything they had fought for in this place, felt like a betrayal. But she knew there was no choice. They had no more time. She packed quickly, moving in silence, every motion sharp and purposeful. She tried to steady her breathing, but the weight of everything, of all the choices that had led her here, pressed down on her like a boulder. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep pretending she was strong enough for this. Boone watched her with his usual intensity, but there was something softer in his eyes, a flicker of something that could have been regret. She didn't know if he was looking at her like that because of the danger they were in or because of something else. "Let's go," he said, breaking the tension between them. They slipped out of the cabin and into the night, the snow crunching beneath their boots, the wind biting at their skin. Boone led the way, rifle in hand, his pace steady and sure. Eleanor followed closely behind, her heart pounding in her chest. The trees closed in around them as they moved deeper into the forest. The shadows were thick here, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and cold earth. It felt like the world had turned on its head, like the safety of the cabin had been a lie, and now they were truly alone, with nothing but the wilderness between them and the men who would kill them both without a second thought. They didn't speak much as they traveled. Both of them focused on the trail ahead, the creaking of the trees and the crunch of snow their only companions. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the world felt as if it had been swallowed whole by the darkness. Boone's pace never faltered, but Eleanor could see the strain in his shoulders, the way his hand tightened on the rifle, his eyes darting to the woods with every sound. She knew what he was thinking. He was waiting for the first sign that the men were following, and when it came, he would fight to the death to protect her. She couldn't bear it. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. She didn't want him to die. She didn't want him to throw his life away for her. "I can't," she said, her voice cracking. Boone stopped, turning to look at her, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" "I can't keep running," she repeated, her voice low but firm. "I can't keep being the reason you're risking everything." His gaze softened, but his jaw tightened. "Eleanor, don't talk like that. You." "No." She cut him off, her hand shaking as she reached out to stop him. "You're not some kind of shield for me. I'm not going to keep dragging you into this. You've already done more than I could ever repay." The silence between them was thick, and for a moment, it felt like the world itself had stopped turning. Then Boone stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently grasp her arm. "You're not dragging me into anything," he said, his voice so quiet that it almost didn't sound like him. "I made my choices. This is what I've chosen. You're not a burden, Eleanor. You're everything." Her heart skipped a beat. "Boone." He met her eyes, his expression hardening again. "We're not done yet. You're still breathing. And as long as you're breathing, I'll fight. For you. For us." Before she could respond, there was a rustling in the trees ahead. Her breath caught in her throat as she instinctively grabbed for the gun in her belt. Boone's hand shot out, holding her steady. "Wait," he murmured, his voice barely audible. The sound grew closer, then stopped altogether. For a long moment, they stood there, frozen, listening. The tension in the air was so thick that Eleanor felt like she might suffocate. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound was gone. Boone's shoulders relaxed. False alarm. Eleanor exhaled, the breath she had been holding escaping her in a shudder. But the fear still lingered, sharp and biting. "They're coming, aren't they?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Boone didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned and kept moving, a steady, unyielding force. "They'll come," he said after a moment. "And when they do, we'll be ready. But they won't find us." Eleanor's chest tightened as she followed him through the snow, the weight of everything crashing down on her again. The world was closing in, and they had no time left. But then, just as she was about to voice the fear she'd been holding inside, Boone stopped dead in his tracks. He had heard something she hadn't. From the darkness, a voice called out, "Boone." It was low, familiar, like a shadow from his past coming back to haunt him. The name hit her like a wave. "Burke." Boone's hand was at his rifle before Eleanor could even process the words. But the voice spoke again, a calm, deadly drawl cutting through the night. "5 words, Harrow. 5 words that'll save you both." Boone stiffened. "What are you talking about?" The voice's owner stepped out of the shadows then, a tall man with a red feather in his hat, one of Burke's men. But there was something different in his eyes, something that made Boone hesitate. "5 words, Harrow," the man repeated. "Just 5 words, and you'll walk away from this. Together." Boone's grip tightened on the rifle, but he didn't raise it. The man smiled, almost like he was savoring the moment. "Tell her, Boone. Tell her the 5 words." Boone swallowed hard, his throat dry. And then, like a confession, he spoke the 5 words that had haunted him for so long. "I never wanted to be alone." The man froze. The wind whispered between them, carrying with it the weight of those 5 words. And in that moment, everything changed. The air shifted, the tension broke, and for the first time, Eleanor understood. Boone had never wanted to be alone. Not really. And in that single moment, everything that had kept them apart, fear, pain, mistrust, began to unravel. But the danger wasn't over yet. They weren't safe. Not yet. The man's hand twitched toward his gun. And then, the world went silent. Eleanor didn't know what would happen next. But Boone's hand was in hers. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't afraid.